Alright guys, now I'm going to talk about mental health and mental illness and my personal battles with it and how I've managed to get my, depression and social anxiety under control. Social anxiety, especially because doing something like this in the past would have scared the fuck out of me, like really scared the fuck out of me. So touching on the first video, I believe, and I haven't been formally diagnosed, and I've never really been to see a psychologist about my own mental health, in which that's something that I feel is not a strength. That's something that if I do feel suicidal again, I will seek the help of a psychologist, because that's an area that I don't really, a lot of these things I have used a lot of trial and error, a lot of reading, a lot of self-diagnosis and research to come up with that have helped me. But I'm sure it would have saved me a lot of time and a lot of mental illness, a lot of really battling through this. It would have saved me a lot of time to go and see a psychologist. But I think also on the flip side, the fact that I haven't seen a psychologist has also helped me be not identify as being someone who's depressed or someone who's socially anxious, which has helped me in a sense because I've felt like it's something I can overcome and it's something that isn't me. I don't identify with it, which some people would argue is not wise, but for me I feel it's also helped, that I don't identify as a severely depressed, suicidal, anxious person, even though I was, has helped me overcome it. So I think from my perspective, and I'm not a psychologist, but I'm talking about my experience overcoming mental illness and my mental health battles, I think that's rule number one. Know that although there is a genetic predisposition to mental illness, it's not you. You don't need to identify as being someone who's depressed and anxious. I feel like too many people give in to this identity and let it overwhelm them and justify behaviors that or look for excuses to feel depressed and anxious. And I know it's very difficult to overcome these things, and I do understand there is a genetic predisposition in some areas that you're just going to be depressed and you're just going to be anxious, but don't let it take over your life because you identify with it. That's one area where I personally feel I have never done, and it has helped me personally. So that's rule number one, in my opinion. Don't identify so much with it that it takes over your life and that you find every excuse to feel depressed and anxious. And you just feel helpless. You feel like you can't do anything. Where you really can. There's behavioral changes you can make and mindset changes you can make to help you overcome these to an extent. And for some people, I think completely or almost cure these symptoms. Rule number two is nutrition and exercise helps so much. And I know nutrition and exercise isn't going to cure depression and anxiety, but for me, I noticed a significant mood change and mood increase and just more control over my emotions and just feeling generally better when I eat healthy, wholesome foods and exercise regularly. And by regularly, I don't mean every day, three times a week minimum. That's step number one. Step number two, when you've got the right nutrients getting into your brain and into your body, when you've got the right amount of chemicals in your brain due to eating healthy, wholesome foods, plenty of healthy fats and healthy proteins and healthy carbohydrates, and you're exercising to shoot enough chemicals through the brain and get the body moving. There's so much research that goes to show nutrition and exercise plays a massive role in relieving depression and anxiety equally, if not just as well as antidepressants. So number 2, now I'm not saying that's going to cure everything, but it's going to really fucking help. And if you don't sort out your exercise and nutrition, then please don't complain about being in a shitty mood. Number three is it's okay to be anxious, and it's okay to be sad. I think that's a huge one for me that took me a long time to understand. Feeling unhappy, even feeling suicidal, and feeling really depressed is okay. It's normal. Most people will feel these emotions from time to time. If you're, diagnosed with depression, you of course feel it more and for longer. In which case I've definitely been there for months at a time, really unhappy and depressed and suicidal. And one thing that kept me in that state was my resistance. I didn't want to be in that state so badly, and I felt so guilty and ashamed of being in that state that I would resist it, and I would beat myself up for feeling that way, and feeling anxious and feeling unhappy. And I think that was a bad thing. I think being okay with it and just accepting it. And the cool thing with when you accept that you're in a depressed state is that you sort of just go about your day in that state and make it work. You're feeling so unhappy, you don't want to get out of bed, but then you accept, okay, I'm depressed. Am I going to allow this? I'm cool with that. It's normal. Am I going to allow this to overtake my life? Or am I going to feel this way and just go through the motions? And what I found was during periods where I was severely depressed and suicidal, once I just started my day, I would force myself, as difficult as it was to start my day, you'd start to build momentum and you'd start to realize things aren't that bad. Things aren't as bad as you're creating in your mind. So that's sort of rules 3 and 4. And 1 is accept and be okay with being unhappy and suicidal and sad and anxious. And number 4, just go and do some stuff anyway. No matter how you feel, just go and do some stuff. Force yourself, because then your mood, even though it doesn't lift, I wouldn't say it lifts, but you start to realize I can function. I can still function even though I'm feeling fucking shit right now. Next, this really helped me with social anxiety. This is an interesting one. This is rule number 5. Force yourself into uncomfortable situations. Situations that almost situations that can incite anxiety. Sort of exposure to fear. And I guess cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, does this to an extent where you start to expose yourselves to little fears, little challenges, I guess, to get over your social anxiety. But I would purposefully, I remember way back when, I would force myself to go up to a girl, for example, and ask them where I should buy some clothes from. And that would scare the fuck out of me. I remember I was in my early 20s and I forced myself to go up to a person, usually a girl, because that girl's scared the fuck out of me. And I remember, because I recorded it one time, I recorded my voice, as weird as that sounds, and I was like, excuse me. Like, I can't even fake the anxiety that I had. I was so anxious. My voice was so shaky, and I was literally shaking. Excuse me, where do you think is? I'm looking to buy some clothes for a party. Where do you think? And I would ask where the best place was, and I'd force myself to ask 10 different girls this to overcome my social anxiety. And almost had a panic attack like every single time. But what I found was that the next day I was walking around with a new kind of confidence that I'd never had before. And it was that exposure to fear that really made a difference in overcoming social anxiety for me. And then I would build from there. I remember then sometimes at nightclubs, and I'd need alcohol, I'd go up and talk to people. I'd force myself to talk to 10 people in that night. And even if it was just, hi, how are you? My name's Aaron. They might just look at me like I'm a weirdo. I'll be like, see ya, and walk away. And then to the point where, if you've recently seen, I did a free hugs video where I'm out on a bridge in Sydney offering free hugs. You know, I'm regularly trying to push myself out of this comfort zone here, because I know fear, anxiety is something that I've always had to battle with. I've always been very shy and scared, and pushing myself through larger and larger and larger boundaries. Of course, I have to build up to that. Pushing through that fear makes you realize and trust yourself that you can handle yourself in those fearful situations. And every time it builds your confidence just a little bit more, reduces that anxiety just a little bit more, because you know you can handle yourself in any sort of situation that you put yourself in. So that's what I would recommend to anyone battling with anxiety, especially. Start to expose yourself to these extremely fearful situations that you don't want to be in, understanding that it will make you realize that it's nowhere near as bad as you're building it up to in your brain. And probably lastly, and this links into one of the earlier videos, I found for me with depression and anxiety, meditation helped significantly. And when I was first overcoming both of these issues, I would meditate, as I said before, at least 10 minutes a day. There were times when I would get up to an hour on some days. I would meditate, be it in half an hour periods throughout the day, or 1 hour straight. I would spend a lot more time in nature, and I found that really calmed me down as well, and helped lift depression. Over time, of course, it wasn't immediate. It probably took me about 2 to 3 months before I actually felt some significant benefits from meditating regularly. So keep that in mind. You're going to have to meditate regularly, consistently, over several months before you're going to get the benefits from it. But it really helped me calm down, slow down, especially with anxiety and with depression. And I know there's research to back this up, and it's probably not really known why just yet, but meditating just lifts your mood, or it makes you observe your thoughts more without identifying with them. If you have a sad thought, if you have a really unhappy thought, you notice the thought, you objectively let the thought flow by, and it doesn't, oh, that's out of focus, and it doesn't take over you. So they're probably the major points that I would say about how to overcome mental illness and mental health issues.